From the Workers' Credit Union studio at Fitchburg Access Television, welcome to the only debate between the candidates for state representative for the 3rd Worcester District, incumbent Democrat Michael Kushmerek and his Republican challenger Aaron Packard. By virtue of the coin toss, we'll begin opening statements with Representative Kushmerek.
Kevin, thank you to our FATV and FLAP hosts. Thank you. I'd also like to thank my opponents for being here this evening and engaging in this critical discussion. And to the voters, 2 years ago you gave me such an amazing opportunity to serve you and to be your voice on Beacon Hill for the residents of Fitchburg and Lunenburg. After serving so many of you as the Fitchburg City Council president and a city councilor over the course of 8 years, the past 2 years spent on Beacon Hill, we've accomplished so much, from securing $4.8 million in state income directly targeted to areas like public safety, like critical infrastructure needs and repairs, our parks and our nonprofit sector, securing another $60 million in bond authorizations. And we filed 10 pieces of legislation this past session, more than half of which we passed, including some critical bills around veterans benefits, mental health access, economic development, and downtown housing development and production. But most importantly, we continue doing what you sent us here to do, which was to listen and amplify your voice on Beacon Hill. We engaged with more than 1,000 constituents to help with legislative advocacy, to hear critical constituent calls and help resolve constituent issues, navigating the halls of bureaucracy. And we also engaged with more than 200 small business owners across the entire district over the past 24 months, helping to understand their needs, their challenges, and the opportunities that lie awake ahead for them. And so when you sent me to Beacon Hill 2 years ago, you did so because I listened to you. I heard you. And 2 years later, I still hear you. I'm still listening. And my pledge to you is each and every day to go to Beacon Hill and to amplify your voice and ensure that the needs of all of those, both businesses and residents in Fitchburg and Lunenburg alike, are heard in the halls of Boston. Thank you.
Mr. Packard.
Well, thank you for the opportunity for the job interview, both of you. Thank you. FATV and the residents of Fitchburg and Lunenburg, thank you for listening. God. Everything begins and ends with Him. And I wouldn't be standing here today if it wasn't for Him. I thank you all for the opportunity to be here tonight. And I thank you all out there for your support and belief that a regular guy can step up and do something to help. My name is Aaron Packard. I was born in Worcester. My father was from Holden. My mother was from Worcester by way of Canada and England, from where she was born. My mom is a legal resident here in Massachusetts. And my father, the Packard name, has been a mainstay in Massachusetts since 1638. So it's quite a lineage. I've lived on and off throughout my life in the Worcester County area, sometimes with my father and grandparents in Holden, and sometimes with mom in different various other cities, Leominster, Gardner, Worcester. The bulk of the last 20 years has been in the Leominster-Fitchburg area, so I do have Twin City love for both. I've lived on both sides of the streets, both metaphorically and legitimately, spiritually and survival-wise. You know, I've lived in the projects. I've lived on the main streets and back roads. I've lived in the suburbs. I've had a taste of just about everything that comes along in this world. I've worn many hats. I've worked many jobs. I started working at the age of 13, and I continue to do so today, hence working man for the working people. I come from a long line of family of hard workers, teachers, philosophy, law enforcement officers, past and present, and a long line of veterans, including myself. So here I am today, and I thank you again.
So we get into the meat of the debate. I'll ask a question. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer, and then we will open the floor up for an open format where you can have rebuttal, you can clarification, or you can directly question each other. First question. On September 29th, Unitil announced a massive rate hike ahead of the winter season, which will result in residents in Fitchburg and Lunenburg seeing an increase of about 26% in their monthly bills beginning in December. Unitil has been a bone of contention with voters for decades, yet here we are still with Unitil and still seeing continual rate increases. Is there anything that you could or would do as state representative to address this, and if so, what would that be? Mr. Packard.
Well, definitely would have to get complete information on what is going on behind the scenes. You know, there is quite a few complaints from all of us, both sides of the aisle, of why isn't something being done. I know just recently some prices have been aggregated into the system, but there's just no need for raising the rates the way they are. I just don't foresee it. What I can do is interact with the fellow legislature, listen to the constituents, the voters, the people around the block.
Mr. Kushmerek.
So, you know, it's been painfully refreshing to hear the rest of the Commonwealth outside of the Unitil catchment area finally understand what these rate increases look like. And I think the folks that have been living in a Unitil service area for decades know that pain all too well, of rate increases and rate hikes every single year, where Fitchburg residents line up, they plead their case to the DPU, Department of Public Utilities, only to not be heard, and then Unitil increases the prices to the maximum allowable rate every single year. And even this past year, with an Attorney General intervention that knocked a rate increase from $70 down to $40, again, we still got a $40 increase on the average bill for Fitchburg and Lunenburg residents last winter alone. And now we hear talks of increases in the tune of anywhere from 40 to 63% this year. It's no surprise that pain to us, and that's exactly why I filed the municipal choice legislation. And the Muni Choice Bill essentially allows it easier and makes it more affordable for municipalities to buy out the infrastructure from investor-owned utilities like Unitil. That would allow either Fitchburg and the four communities that have Unitil to go at it together with a municipal light company and light plants. And this legislation was originally crafted by then Representative DiNatale, now Mayor DiNatale. He understands the challenges with this legislation. He filed it over the course of 8 years. It made momentum, and unfortunately he left the legislature, and this bill wasn't able to make it across the finish line. We've been able to pick up that legislation, modernize it, redraft, refile alongside Senator Cronin, and so proud to introduce that legislation to allow for meaningful relief. We've made a lot of progress already. We've been able to meet with the legislative chairs to get more than a dozen legislators to sign on, and the Conservation Law Foundation to throw their weight and their resources in terms of advocating for this bill. So we've made a lot of progress. Unfortunately, we're in it for the long haul. We're not going away, and we won't be quiet. Unitil will hear us.
Mr. Packard, rebuttal.
I agree with a lot of the things that there has been some progress, and I applaud the mayor and yourself for trying to push that through. I just keep wondering about all the tax add-ons and stuff. So what? Like I said when I started, I'd have to learn more in depth the details of it, since I am walking in from the outside.
Sure.
Anything else on this subject?
I would just add, so this would be very much like your water or your sewer bill that you get from the city of Fitchburg. And essentially what you'd have is you wouldn't have a cost center. You wouldn't have folks who are looking to profit. There's no shareholders that are looking to make exorbitant profits. The idea would be this would be a municipal utility offered by the city. Its proceeds couldn't exceed 5% of their annual operating budget to hold as a reserve. And then anything more than that would have to go towards making the utilities cheaper for residents. The There are a number of municipally owned light companies operating in Massachusetts, and we don't have to look too far to find those examples. Ashburnham is one such example, as is Sterling, and they offer, between the two of them, among the lowest rates and the highest reliability of service in the entire Commonwealth. So I think we have those blueprints. Now what we need to do is be able to change that legislation to make it easier for the city to engage in those fair negotiations over fair market value with Unitil, to be able to buy them out and literally give the power back to the residents and the ratepayers of our region.
Anything else, Mr. Packard?
I agree with the municipal functions of light and water. Having, like I said, grown up in Holden for a while, they do have their own municipal, and it was quite easy for my grandparents to stay on top of it without all the drastic hikes from back then, Mass Electric, National Grid nowadays, or whatnot. So that's a good piece of legislation that you're trying to push through. Thank you.
Issue 2. Question 1 on the ballot would impose an additional 4% income tax on annual taxable income in excess of $1 million. Quite simply, do you support or oppose this tax amendment? Representative Kushmerek.
I support this, and I know that I look at adding taxes and adding tax revenue as the last resort. But frankly, drive our roads, experience the potholes, the aging infrastructure, bridges that need to be modernized and rebuilt, dams that are failing. And that's not exclusive to Fitchburg. We know our roads are in rough shape, but there's aging infrastructure, and our transportation system is crumbling. Look no further than Channel 4, 5, or 7 on a weeknight to find out what's happening with the MBTA. And then look at our schools. And our schools that have seen a direct infusion of funding for our K through 12 system are just now, after decades, getting some much-needed resources and relief. But our child care system is inaccessible to so many. Our early childhood education system can be cost prohibitive to so many, and there's deserts across the state. And our higher education system receives less money today than it did 25 years ago, not adjusted against inflation. Those are real dollars, less today than 25 years ago in state support. So I'd submit to you that we're systematically defunding our education system, and we've neglected our infrastructure, and at the same time, we need funding. We need funding that can be delivered directly to those. And this amendment, question 1, allows us to constitutionally earmark those funds directly to the areas that we need most in our community: infrastructure, transportation, and public schools.
Mr. Packard.
I would say no on the tax hike because the raise of the income tax by 8% on some small businesses and earners, it pushes those taxpayers out of the state. Those high-earning dollars are moving to New Hampshire, they're moving to Florida, they're moving to places where they can be exempt from their money. And there is no guarantee that the tax will go towards this additional spending of transportation and education. It is said, but there is no guarantee of it. It's the 7th attempt being proposed by Massachusetts lawmakers, non-citizens. It would amend the Constitution in order to add 80% of this charge. So some high-income earners, small businesses and retirees are going to feel the pinch. Those small businesses will have to raise their prices, and it trickles back to the buyer.
I would simply add that, we're talking about a very small population across the entire Commonwealth who would be affected by this. I don't know many small business owners that after the end of their tax deductions, their personal earnings, not because this doesn't affect businesses, this only affects individuals whose net income on an annual basis exceeds $1 million. Again, in income, not gross revenue. And so there's 7 people in the 3rd Worcester District who would be affected, and early estimates are they're talking about in the ballpark of 1,500 to 1,700 individuals across the entire Commonwealth. I'd add that many of them disproportionately benefit from our education and our transit systems. whether it's the biotechnology fields like Moderna, who have profited immensely during the COVID pandemic. So many of these folks, their wealth has grown disproportionately during a time of pandemic where everybody else's earning and purchasing power has decreased. So I would say this allows an opportunity for us to not only catch up and invest, a once-in-a-generation opportunity to invest in our transportation and education, but I would also submit that we're only talking about a select group of individuals who earn over $1 million, and up until their first $1 million, they continue to earn that millionth dollar at the same rate that you and I do. Whether you're making $30,000 or $1 million, your tax rate stays the same, and only on that next dollar after $1 million does this even come into play.
You're good?
I'm good.
Okay. If social media is an accurate barometer, road conditions in Fitchburg are near or at the top of the priority list for residents. Elected leaders, particularly the chairman of the City Council's Finance Committee, have been highly critical of the state legislature and have laid the blame at their feet for continually level funding Chapter 90 funds. First of all, is this criticism of the state legislature fair? And as state representative, what is your plan to bring home more dollars for our roads and bridges? Mr. Packard.
All right. Well, it hasn't increased in well over 10 years. Construction costs continue to climb. Funding stays flat. It's the main reason why our roads are in the condition that they're in. It's almost to the point of gross negligence. I mean, my own street, before Unitil started repairing pipes, it was called Swiss Cheese Road. It's just, my shocks, thankfully, are good enough. It's unacceptable, especially when the state reports billions in surplus. Fitchburg's gotten 1.1 million every year, and it needs to be at least 5 miles a year just to stay afloat. So we need 5 times that amount across the board for everyone, not just for Fitchburg. It's for all municipals. And the Mass Municipal Association, the lobbying arm, pegged the needs for entire 351 cities, towns, at 4 times more than what the state currently funds. So that means Fitchburg's case quadrupling the funding. But the legislature continues to ignore it, and it just keeps getting out of control. Now, the annual state program paid out bond bills. It's been $200 million for the entire state for well over a decade. It should be $700 to $800 million per the MMA. The formula of the whole Chapter 90 needs a reform, not just for us, but for the entire state. And that money is there, the $2.9 billion that's supposedly be getting refunded, that's been there the whole time. So, Fitchburg's topography is worse than most as well, being the second hilliest city in the country, next to San Francisco. Most hills and groundwater and rock foundation, so the roads deteriorate much faster and more out of the pool than based on others.
Yeah. Mr. Kushmerek.
So absolutely. I'll be honest, I think the criticism is fair. We're talking about more than 15 years of static and level funding at the municipal road paving level. I know my predecessors have been frustrated by the lack of increases as well. I've been here for the past 22 months, and I agree, it's frustrating. I drive the same roads as you to work each and every day. I see the potholes, I see the aging condition of our infrastructure. With that said, however, I think this year we had a market change in the state's pattern. So we increased Chapter 90 funded formula, so not just out of the bonds, we increased it by an extra $100 million, so a 50% increase in Chapter 90 funding, statewide and emergency relief. So that funding was awarded in April to our DPW directors. So Fitchburg will receive an extra $600,000 or $700,000 on top of the annual allocation. But I think it's not just Chapter 90 that we're talking about. Chapter 90 helps municipalities pave municipal roads, but we're talking about the entire picture of municipal infrastructure. And that's the funding that also needs to change with it. And so that's exactly what we targeted, because there are a number of state-funded programs like small bridge repair programs, complete streets initiatives, multimodal transit and access grants and initiatives, as well as dam repair programs. And again, these are just transportation infrastructure focused programs. But those alone disproportionately benefit gateway communities like Fitchburg. There are 27 gateway communities in the Commonwealth. Fitchburg and Leominster are two among them. And so we get bumped to the top of that list. We get prioritization. So when we're able to allocate additional funding to those small bridge repair programs, and we know Fitchburg, because of the hills, because of the rivers, have so many of these bridges that are in need of repair. We're fortunate. We're constantly in queue for the next bridge. So almost every year we get funding for the next bridge, and then the next one ends up in the cycle. The same is true with our dams, with complete streets initiatives, like how Main Street and Boulder Drive were recently funded for their enhancements as well. And so ultimately, over the past 2 years, we've increased Chapter 90 by 50% just this year. And we increased by $445 million those additional programs. So we're talking in total about $800 million worth of municipal road funding. Despite that, it's still not enough.
Mr. Packard, rebuttal?
Nope, that's good enough for now. Just I'd have to say, it's been over a decade, so we really need to push this through. It needs to happen to get those funds out to those municipals.
Well, and I agree, and that's why I fought so hard to make sure that we got the extra $445 million, totaling nearly $800 million in total municipal funding for our infrastructure, and making sure that we're working with our DPW commissioners. Now, Lunenburg was a community that passed a tax override or a debt exclusion several years ago to ensure that taxpayers paid a little bit more at the local level to pave their roads. We know that that's not a possibility in Fitchburg. That was discussed recently at the city council level and won't be happening. And Fitchburg is is the only major city in Massachusetts that for the past 15 years has not regularly budgeted a single dollar towards its road improvements. So we know that they're unable, not because they're unwilling, but because they are unable to fund it. So I agree. The state has to step up and do more to help communities like Fitchburg.
Just a follow-up question on this, and either of you can jump in, just an open discussion. When you go to Boston, there seems to be a little bit of a conflict between the urban state representatives and the more rural state representatives, especially the climate change activists, and our climate goals in Massachusetts is really redirecting transportation dollars and infrastructure dollars to public transportation. For climate issues, where more of the rural and in this area we're looking to fix roads and bridges for car and automobile transportation. How do you balance the climate concerns with people pushing for dollars going to public transportation versus what the needs are for your constituents?
Either of you? Sure. All right, no problem. The climate change, that is the topic being pushed up and down the coast, across the nation. Climate change is to me is going from New England to Florida, period. You want to change the weather, yes, we need to cut down on our pollution, our smogs, stuff like that. That's why we have catalytic converters and not, gas burning diesels going around town. It's a matter of choice. Now, as far as the rural communities, they have roads they have to keep filling in with gravel, or they do need to be widened because winter plows can't get through. It might be, maybe barely a car and a half wide in some locations. Well, that plow's having a hard time, traffic's backed up. Those roads are part of that infrastructure that need to be widened so it can accommodate those travelers that are commuting into work. You want to take public transportation, that's great. not a problem. That saves you money on owning a car. It's a really where you live in a matter of choice, but from those rural communities stand, they can't be ignored. Their roads need to be taken care of so they can be accommodated.
I'll say particularly, yes, mass transit is a wonderful resource for those that live or work along mass transit lines, right? But not everybody does. Fitchburg is fortunate. We have 2 stops on the Fitchburg line. And you will beat traffic by taking the commuter rail most of the time when it's reliable, when it runs on time, and when it's not too cold outside. Yes, mass transit will get you to Boston in an hour and 15 to an hour and 30 minutes, which often beats my 2 hour and 50-minute commute into Boston at rush hour to get into the State House. So it can be a benefit and an asset if we properly invest in it and fund it. However, to your point, I would say that as we look for the electrification of cars and vehicles on the road, those electric cars, whether they run a diesel or they run on an electric motor, they require good roads in order to operate. They're still driving on the same surfaces. And so there's that constant reminder of we need to repair our roads, we need to repair our aging infrastructure, our roads, our bridges. And I think that's why it's so critical that we continue to invest, both urban and rural. And the funding formula is one such part, but I think it starts with making sure that we continue to fight. So I think my track record has shown that I'm going to go out there to Boston and I will fight for and ensure that we bring back more dollars than we received the previous year. And given the opportunity, that's what I'd be seeking to do, is ensure that we continuously raise that bar and bring back more resources for Fitchburg and Lunenburg.
Anything else on this, Mr. Packard?
You made some good points about having the access here in Fitchburg. I've used it numerous times myself. Here's what needs to happen, though, is not the Band-Aids, not just the one-time allocations. We need to have a recurring, perpetually sustaining funding for this. That's the inaction is just dwindling. It gets kicked down the can for maybe the next representative who takes over, or the next leader who takes over, or the next study group that happens to look at these bridges and roads and throughways for our transportation. So it just needs to have an action now for a continuous flow for us.
We good? Issue 4. Earlier this year, the United States Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, meaning that decisions on regulating abortion now lay with our state legislatures. As a state representative, would you vote for any restriction on reproductive rights in Massachusetts? And if so, which restrictions would you support? Mr. Kushmerek.
So I want to be clear, when we're talking about a woman's right to choose, we're not just talking about access to reproductive rights. We're talking about a woman's right to make her own decisions with regards and respect to her health care. That is a conversation between a woman and her doctor, period. And I'll go further to say that I believe fundamentally that it is a woman's right to choose if, when, and how she chooses to start a family. And earlier this year, I was proud to be a part of a legislature that took action when the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade and the Dobbs decision. It was the Massachusetts legislature and the Massachusetts governor working hand in hand with Governor Baker, who immediately issued an executive order. And in the coming days, the legislature responded in kind to codify and make permanent the issues articulated in the executive order, which were to ensure that a woman's right to choose is enshrined in Massachusetts law, and to ensure that access to emergency contraceptives will always be covered, access to emergency abortion, and access to make sure that insurance companies not only pay for the procedures, but contraceptives as well as protecting workers in the industry and patients who seek those services in other states. Massachusetts responded in kind, and that was passed by an overwhelming majority of the legislature. And I was really pleased that the majority of my Republican colleagues, the majority of the Republican caucus, joined me and House leadership in helping to move that forward. So we had an overwhelming majority with a veto-proof majority, and Governor Baker worked with the legislature every step of the way. And I'd say that's it responded in kind to how the majority of Massachusetts, nearly 80% of Massachusetts voters, feel. So I was proud to be a part of that.
Mr. Packard.
I absolutely believe God gave every one of us the right to choose. That's the way I learned it in Bible studies back in the days. And you're absolutely right. A woman can choose whatever she wants to do. That's between her and her doctor and God. I am absolutely pro-life. I do not support abortion in the slightest. I don't. It's killing babies. And I have nothing further to say on it.
Mr. Kushmerek. So are you saying you the right to choose, but you're pro-life? So how would you, are you personally pro-life? How would you vote as a state legislator?
I am pro-life. I do not support any monies going into any clinic or any doctor or anywhere that a woman goes in to kill a baby.
Yeah. Anything else?
I'd say I think my track record has shown I support a woman's right to choose without restriction in the Commonwealth.
Okay. Issue 5. We are facing the highest inflation in 40 years. What can the state do, if anything, to help residents combat the high costs of food, heating, and other commodities? Mr. Packard.
That would be tax cuts. Plain and simple. Just simple tax cuts. There is stifling inflation for groceries, for anything. But yet, liquor, cigarettes, other non-essentials, I've seen relatively stay the same. Being a smoker, I pay attention to that. A lot of New Hampshire people come down here to Massachusetts for marijuana. A lot of Massachusetts people go across the state line for beer, cigarettes, or what have you. So there's a lot of ridiculous taxes heaped on what is already an inflation rate that is insane. Say, for example, you have an income of $70,000 a year. With taxes, it drops it down to, $55,000, $50,000, and then on top of the inflation, it's $48,000 paycheck. So you're not seeing any of it. The gas tax can totally have been paused, and the tax cuts recently could have been made.
Mr. Kushmerek. So I think we're all feeling the pinch, right? Whether it's at the gas pump, whether it's in the grocery store. Folks like myself are making decisions on, do we buy the generic version of a product? Do we change our shopping habits? I know I have. And despite historic wage growth, we still saw the purchasing power of the average worker in Massachusetts decline. So despite some seeing during a pandemic a 7 or 10% raise, you might have lost anywhere from 7 to 10% of your purchasing power, even with that increase. And so everybody's feeling it. Not to mention, let's talk about whether you're parents of children or seniors who haven't seen a meaningful COLA increase in decades. You're feeling it. And so, absolutely, I agree. We need to focus on tax cuts in the Commonwealth, and I think that can provide meaningful tax relief and a meaningful relief to our residents. And that's exactly what I've been working on, and that's exactly what will be done by the end of this year. Massachusetts legislature agreed unanimously. Democrats and Republicans and the administration came together to propose what will amount to the most expansive tax relief package seen by any state in the country in nearly 20 years. $1 billion of middle and working class family tax relief returned back to Massachusetts residents this year, and another $500 million on an ongoing and permanent basis. We're talking real substantial tax cuts to middle class and working class families, and there's something in it for everybody all the way up until upper middle class families. We're talking about senior circuit tax breakers. We're talking child care dependent credits. rental deductions for folks, earned income tax credits, and even estate tax deductions, and ensuring that this year, when you file your taxes in January or February of next year, you'll see that difference on your tax return.
You say that, it sounds very good, but you just recently voted no on tax cuts. I read that on the log. You voted no with everybody else up in Beacon Hill with no tax cuts this past year when it could have been essential.
I'm unclear on what tax cut or what tax item you're referring to. I can tell you there's an economic development bill that is before the legislature in the final phase of the conference committee. There's been negotiating between the governor and the legislative leadership in both House and Senate, and again, unanimously passed, working in conjunction with 100% of my Republican colleagues and my Democratic colleagues. And this bill will be done across the finish line and on the governor's desk within the next 60 days.
How about the gas tax cut or the tax pause that we recently had to see if it was going to go through, and it didn't?
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought up the gas tax, because the gas tax is a wonderful myth that you, the consumer, pay the tax. You don't. You do not pay the gas tax when you're at the pump. No part of that is actually tax that goes to the state, nor is any part of that gas tax paid for by the gas company owner. Gas tax is paid at the point of import by 12 companies that are allowed import licenses into Massachusetts, BP and Exxon among them. So if you cut the gas tax, you are giving tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars in tax relief to 12 companies that import in Massachusetts. Not to mention, that would also defund our Chapter 90 funding. Chapter 90 and the transportation bond bills are paid for by the gas tax. So we would be systematically defunding the one mechanism that helps Fitchburg, and the only mechanism that helps Fitchburg pave its roads. So I'd submit to you that, yes, millions of dollars will be saved by a gas tax repeal or suspension. It just won't be by you at the pump, and it won't be by the gas station owner. It'll be by Exxon and BP. And look no further than two neighboring states, Connecticut and New York, who did it, where they've seen less than a 1% decrease in gas prices at the pump in New York and Connecticut, who just did this within the past year.
Any rebuttal?
No rebuttal.
You good? Voters in November will be voting on the issue of giving driver's licenses to undocumented immigrants after opponents of the new law obtained enough signatures to put the question on the ballot to repeal the law recently enacted by the legislature. What is your view on this issue, Mr. Kushmerek?
Sure. During the course of my 10-year public career, serving as an elected official, when my police chief has called and asked me to do something that helps increase the safety of the public and increase officer safety of our law enforcement, our men and women in blue on the streets, I've always been there to answer the call and support the chief. And so when Chief Martineau called me earlier this year and said, this bill is about road safety, it's about public safety, it's about law enforcement safety, and it will do all three of those things, you better believe I was there to answer the call and support him. And I think the data is very clear in supporting the chief on this. Meanwhile, Chief Martineau is one of 44 city chiefs of police, major chiefs of police, including the entire Association of Chiefs of Police, that came forward and said, this is a good bill. This is common sense legislation that helps keep our roads safe. And why are they saying that? They're saying it because there are 16 red and blue states across the entire country dating back to the mid-90s that have passed this legislation. In every single instance, in all 16 of those states, we've seen driver fatalities decrease. We've seen hit-and-run accidents decrease. We've seen the number of people insured and the number of people licensed go up. And we've seen insurance rates actually stagnate or go down in many cases because of this legislation. So anytime you have the opportunity to increase officer safety, increase road safety, and save people money along the way, in my mind, that's a no-brainer. And of course, I'm going to be there to support my law enforcement partners and our drivers on the road. So yes, I support it.
Mr. Packard.
I absolutely do not support illegal immigrants getting a driver's license without any restrictions on it. Here's the thing. Earlier this year, the legislature passed that law that would provide Massachusetts driver's licenses to these illegal immigrants. When the bill was being considered, not even a single Republican voted for it, and even Governor Charlie Baker rejected it through the veto. In his letter back to your legislature, he warned that the Registry of Motor Vehicles would not be able to verify someone's identity, nor did we have the resources. He went on to say that under this law, Massachusetts driver's license would no longer confirm that a person is who they say they are. And he warned it restricts the RMV's ability to share citizenship information with those entities responsible for ensuring that only our citizens register for and our votes in elections, because the way this registry works is that it automatically uploads everybody who gets a license to vote. You do not see any fine print of opt-out. Nobody pays attention to that. And here's the thing. It rewards people who broke laws to be here. My immigrant mother. I have friends in this community that have paid thousands and have earned their citizenship. They know the Constitution better than us, Mike, because they've had to take that citizenship test. It triggers billions in new taxpayer benefits, and it provides incentives to bring more illegal immigrants to Massachusetts. It damages the integrity of the state elections by automatically registering these illegals. And guess what? You can preach all the road safety you want. A criminal is going to do whatever the hell a criminal wants to do. I know. I was hit and run, drunk driver. Took off, left me for dead. Did his passport get taken by the state? No, he fled back to a non-extradition country. Still no justice, but you know what? That's okay. Why? They just let him go because being a citizen, his right came first. I served my country very proudly, and I didn't serve it to give it away. Use the front door. Ring the bell. We're more than happy to take in immigrants. Like I said, my mother's an immigrant. My whole family, that side, they became citizens. So no, I do not support this legislation whatsoever.
Rebuttal?
So first, I would agree. Our immigration system is broken, right? Democrats, Republicans, I think we all agree. There's frustration at the local level and the state level that we have a federal system that is broken, that is unmanageable, and seemingly, I think most of us feel that it doesn't work for us and doesn't work for immigrants either. However, at the state legislature, our job is not to enforce immigration law. That's the federal side. Our job is to make sure that we can keep our roads safe and keep our officers and law enforcement safe. And so when our police community comes out and speaks very loudly and clearly in one voice that this will benefit road safety, yes, I'm there with them. But this is also an area I disagree with Governor Baker. Already, RMV are able to verify and validate international identifications. They do that. How do I know that they can do that? Because we have green card residents who are legally here and have passed all of the restrictions and requirements, who are already here, who are getting access to RMV and who are able to present international passports and a dual form of verification. That same standard is being applied. So for a real ID, I know that was a headache for me, right? You go in, you have a utility bill, a license, maybe a passport. In order to qualify for this, you need 2 forms of validated current international IDs in order to qualify. And so it's setting the highest possible standard. It's actually a much higher level of standard than you and I will face when we go for our license. And lastly, to address the piece about voter registration, 16 and 17-year-olds, as well as green card holders, also go through the same process. Do they not? And we don't have issues of 16, 17-year-olds and legal green card holders voting in elections. We know that because our Secretary of State monitors this. All of those folks, anybody who is not on the voter roll in Massachusetts, who is not an eligible and qualified voter, 18 years old and a U.S. citizen, is not allowed to vote. So it may go to the Secretary Gallivan's office in Massachusetts, where there's a centralized database that speaks to 38 other states across the country to make sure that no one votes in multiple elections either. These are secure, they're validated, it ensures election integrity. Secretary of State signed off. He is our chief elections officer of the Commonwealth. He has said this in no way jeopardizes or impacts the voter system. Quite frankly, it has zero effect on voting systems and elections. This has everything to do about road safety and driver safety.
Okay, how about the many young drivers that were given driver's licenses without taking a road test over the past year and a half or so? There was quite a few youngsters out there that got their licenses automatically without taking a driver's test. So there's a safety issue. There is, period. So you could say, oh, it is. You mentioned the legal green card holders. Yeah, key word, legal. We're talking about illegals. They're going to come here, get a license, and then take off and be able to possibly transfer it to Colorado where they've done it. It doesn't make sense. The illegals need to do the right thing. They want to be in this country. You come in, you register, you ring the doorbell and say, hey, I'm here, period.
Anything else on this?
I'll just add, the broken federal immigration system is not the question at hand. It's about road and driver safety. That's what the bill sought to do. And when my chief made that call and asked me to move forward and support this, yes, I support my chief of police and I support my Fitchburg police and Lunenburg police when they say this is a good thing.
It's not just federal. Our state is responsible for protecting its citizens as well, period. There's nothing more to say on this. It's no.
North Worcester County has seen house prices and rents soar in the past few years, percentage-wise even higher than the state and national average. What, if anything, can be done by the state to promote affordable housing options in our area? Mr. Packard.
You know, that's a topic I do have to have more information on, so I'm going to defer to Mike. I'm sorry I don't have an answer for that one.
Mr. Kushmerek.
Yeah, so I mean, quite frankly, right, we haven't seen the pace of housing keep up with the pace of growth and population growth in Massachusetts. There's inadequate housing on the market. You know, you're a real estate agent, right? There are people who want homes who can't find them. There are folks for so many that home ownership is unattainable. And so I think we need to simultaneously help make it easier for folks who aspire to be a first-time homeowner to be able to do that. And I think Governor Baker has worked very well with the legislature, created the first-time home buyer. Essentially, it's called the Home Buyer Dream Act, and it's to help incentivize and provide some state incentives for first-time home buyers who will live in owner-occupied homes in their community. And that qualifies only for gateway communities. So Fitchburg and Leominster are two of those communities, and it'll provide up to $50,000 in assistance to help people realize that dream of home ownership. But I think to really get at the heart of this issue is we need to talk about housing growth and creation. And Senator Cronin and I have partnered to bring more than $1 million in state support to support housing growth and creation. But that's also, it can't just be the state and it can't just be the federal government helping. We need to make sure that we cut down the bureaucracy and work across all lines, municipal, state, and federal. That means zoning changes at a local level. That means working through and engaging property developers. And so, you know, I think while the rest of the state is really struggling at how do we do this, I think Fitchburg in particular, but north central Massachusetts is doing this quite well. Fitchburg has 440 zoned and permitted units of new housing, both apartments, market rate, affordable, as well as new homes permitted in the downtown Fitchburg area alone. It's a tremendous amount of growth that we'll be seeing, whether it's Morin Square or the B.F. Brown development that are both currently underway. and we have hundreds more units that are coming online. But we have to do a lot as a state, and I think it starts with zoning reforms that make it easier for developers to actually develop, but it also means, in this case, investing serious state funding into ensuring that housing can be affordable for developers to even create, never mind make it affordable for people to rent and live in.
Thank you. Mr. Kushmerek, I think this is your third debate with me now.
It is.
So I think you have come to expect a question about what makes you tick, right? So here it comes. So a state legislator, a state representative by its very definition, you're representing your constituents, the values, the beliefs, the interest of your constituents. But people are also looking for leaders who are true to themselves and to lead and show courage of their own convictions. So I'd like each of you to tell us about a specific issue where your personal belief likely differs from the majority of your constituency. What is that issue, and how will you deal with that when there is a conflict between your personal beliefs and values versus the wishes of the majority of those you represent? Mr. Packard.
That is a very good question. Very good question. You know, I've thought about it a lot. And, you know, there comes a time when a leader has to take accountability for who's in his charge, her charge. You're not in charge, but you have to take care of those who are in your care. You're in your charge. And listening to everyone, it doesn't matter if you're Democrat or Independent or Republican. Each and every one of us has a little slightly different view. That's what makes the world go round, is we're all individual thinkers. Try to be individual thinkers. Majority rules in what goes on with that. You know, if it comes out, we need to take, you know, X away from B in order to make C better for the entirety. I'm not being specific enough, and I apologize on that. It really comes down. There has to be something certain within the. If it's for the better of the group that I'm representing, then I would have to suck up my pride and do it.
Mr. Kushmerek.
So it's a great question, and it happens. It happens with regularity, right? And sometimes they're strongly held convictions, and sometimes it's a preference or a belief that one thing might work better than another. Ultimately, where there are things that I hold so deeply, my stance on a woman's right to choose, for example, I try to be very, very clear during the campaign cycle every 2 years of this is who I am. And this is what you will get with me, to make sure that there are there's no uncertainty between the voter of saying, I wonder where he stands on this issue, and if it comes down to a vote on this, because sometimes there is no gray area to operate in. That said, you know, I think I'll point to an example examples in Lunenburg and I think there's very active conversation happening between the planning board and select board right now about which direction do we want the town of Lunenburg to go in. It's one of the fastest growing municipalities in the entire Commonwealth. It's almost doubled its population in 20 years. And generally, I would say housing production, housing development, and commercial development are good things. And that lifts everybody up. However, Lunenburg has traditionally been a small rural and small suburban community with heavy elements of agriculture. And they need to have their own conversation about, I have my preference. I know what I tend to believe, and I think I know what works well for Fitchburg. But that means sitting down and saying, this isn't for me to inflict my will upon the people of Lunenburg and tell them this is what they need. This is for me to sit down and engage them and say, what can I do to help support you and amplify your voice once you've made that decision as a community?
Thank you. Closing statements. Mr. Packard.
That was a good reply, by the way.
Thank you.
It was good. I'll give you that credit. All right. So, closing statements, here we are. State representative. You represent the people the way it was intended. You go, you do the job, you collect your stipend, and then you go, after your term is done, you go back to your trade and your private life. This is the only promise I make. I will not quit on you. I will not give up. I will not be silent. I will always listen. We're not always going to agree, but that, just like Mike said, you listen, because what's going to benefit you as a whole in your community trumps my own personal want or desire, which I have none of. Period. I will never take the 30 pieces of silver that are offered to me. I will not take the bribe. I just will not do any of that. This isn't directed at you, Mike. It's just general. I've seen too much of the fraudulent, backsided things happening in the government, and I say, oh, I have no political experience. Well, actually, I do. I'll be turning 50 coming the new year, and that's a lot of years of being involved in politics. You're living your life in and out of the shadows of what somebody else is doing in an office. So the political stuff, yeah, I'm very well aware of it. I grew up in the 70s, the end of Jimmy Carter era. I fear tearing, the old food stamps again. Of course, it's a debit card now, but, it is what it is. So I've seen full circle come around in my lifetime, and it just needs to stand up for what's crucial for this state is life, liberty, and the pursuit of your happiness the way you want it, not because of what a mass grouping up at Beacon Hill wants to tell us. Thank you.
Mr. Kushmerek.
So first, I want to begin by thanking you, Kevin, and thanking the entire FA-TV team for hosting us here this evening, and to our voters and residents for tuning in and listening to us and our thoughts. I think a lot of you have heard me speak about this before. I never thought I would be here and be in the opportunity to be speaking to you as a state representative for Fitchburg and the people of Lunenburg. I grew up on welfare and food stamps. And so much of my early life was defined by my family's issues with mental health, with substance use, and later with homelessness. And at age 17, as a high school dropout with a GED. And it wasn't until I came to Fitchburg that my fortune changed. It's here that I earned 2 college degrees, became the youngest city council president in the history of Fitchburg. I met and married the love of my life, Carissa, a geriatric social worker in the region. Together we have the most beautiful baby boy, Gabriel, 5 months old. And then 2 years ago, you sent me to Beacon Hill to be your voice. And despite the remarkable change of circumstances that have occurred in my life, from where I come from to where I am now, I have never for 1 second forgotten who I am and where I come from. I haven't forgotten about standing in line at the food pantry, or those difficult moments when you realize you have bills that you can't pay. And the toughest part is those conversations you have with yourself at the end of the night, questioning why life has to be so hard sometimes. Those are closer than I care to admit in my memory. And while I've heard some say, oh, that's exactly what we're talking about, Mike. This is the American dream of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. I say, yeah, that's what the American dream's supposed to be about. But I can tell you, if it weren't for a couple of helping hands, or a lot of helping hands, and a whole lot of lucky breaks along the way, I wouldn't be where I am today. And so many have failed following the same path that I had, who had the same drive, persistence, and dedication, and deserve to be to have made it forward in life as much as me. And at the heart of it, what I believe this is about is rebuilding and reimagining what that American dream means, and ensuring that, yes, you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And it doesn't matter what socioeconomic bracket you were born into, or who your parents are, or how much money you have in your bank account, whether or not you succeed. You can do so by your own merits. And so as a new parent, I look at everything through the lens of being a parent of a 5-month-old. And I question, what is the world I will send Gabriel into 18 years from now? Will it be a world that allows him to have the same opportunities that I had to pursue relentlessly his passions? And so that's what I promise to do for you each and every day, is to go to Beacon Hill and fight every day to ensure that you have the same opportunities that I had to pursue your passions, your dreams, and do so relentlessly. And so I humbly ask for your vote on November 8th for state representative. Thank you.
The election is November 8th. The choice is yours. Go vote. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you.